Hey, welcome. This is The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is fantasy football for 2022 season. Starting out in February. This is lesson 101. Can you imagine? And I hope you had good luck in 2021. I'm working on my data, making figures, doing the Science of Fantasy podcast with my partner in crime, D Mike, and follow us at Fake Pigskin. We'll post our podcast, but some material I will talk about in the podcast. But I like to go ahead and set up my lessons here, uh, trying to stay less bored. So I'm making figures and I'm stopping because I'm actually using this process for me to go through and verbalize the material. I'm finding the answers, hopefully, to the questions that I'm posing. So, doesn't really matter to me how many people jump on or not. It's just a way for me to go through and vocalize and try to get this in my head as we get ready for drafting season. Right now, it's probably best ball season, and I'll probably be doing redraft starting in June. So right now, I'm probably just focusing on the best ball if I'm doing any drafting, which I've already done 2 best ball leagues already. Goodness. Anyway, thanks for listening. This next block of material is going to be looking at average draft position versus end of season results. So the question, I think the main question, does ADP impart any predictive value of end of the season? In other words, is player 100 at the end of the season, was he the 100th best player in, say, whatever position you're looking at? That's an example, the top player. In other words, how reliable are ADPs? And again, this is wisdom of the crowd concept here. If you've been to the racetrack, you understand it's pari-mutuel, there's odds, and the lower the odds, the more probability the horse in question performs well, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to answer the question, is there any predictive power, ADP and end of season? And I think to do that, the way I start is just to update my database. So I've included the 2021 season, and I've got back to 2015. So now I have 7 years, and that allows us to look and have a nice suite of data to consider, 2022. And so I'll make this lesson video here, and we'll just go from there. Let's see, do I move this forward here? Okay, so let me move to slide 1 then of this first lesson 101. So what we have here is a combination of ADP picks over the last 7 years. And at the top is the ADP sectors. And then we have quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs, wide receivers. And we're talking 42 is the total number. And then I do something called a ratio concept of running back to wide receivers picked, and then quarterback to tight end picks. So I kind of wanted to see where's the positional bias, if there is any, and just kind of see what the public tends to do within each position. Okay, so it kind of gets you ready for your draft of the process. I believe you should understand a typical draft. It's kind of like a play, right? You have Act 1, 2, intermission, Act 3, Act 4. In other words, you have a timing, a prediction, a process that occurs. Not every draft is going to be the same, but at least you kind of think about what your opponents are doing and kind of what they're thinking about. And this is a way to give a snapshot. And I look at the ADP sectors, and what that means is the first pick to the sixth pick, for instance, that's sector 1, the 7th to the 12th, 13th to the 18th, and so forth. So you can see the higher ADP as you go down the list here, and I guess I could point that out there. There it is. And so for quarterbacks over the last 7 years, there has not been a quarterback picked in the first 12 picks. So if you're doing that, just be aware that nobody on average does that. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, just is just kind of an average view here. But I think that is why people do more late round quarterback drafting, and we'll go into more. But needless to say, late round quarterback drafting implies you can wait later in your draft to get a viable quarterback, a top quarterback. So then if we go down, we see that there's been 2 quarterbacks picked over 7 years at the 13th to 18th, 3 19th to 24th, 4 25th to 30th. So you can start getting, and of course I colorized low to high, so you can start seeing when a lot of attention is turned to quarterbacks, and we notice we start getting attention at the 49th to 54th prediction, and certainly by the 79th ADP pick, we got 10 quarterbacks that have been picked. So you're starting to get a kind of a slow start, but then it really picks up and then kind of decays later, way late in the draft. So that's kind of an overall pattern. So people have done the more late picking. And if you're saying, well, what would early quarterback look like? Well, you would have high numbers of picks in here. In other words, you might have 10, 11, 12. In other words, probably in super flex leagues, this is not one, this is a one quarterback situation. I suspect if you play a lot of super flex, you should chart when quarterbacks tend to be picked, when's the ADP, and so probably later in the summer. But I think you'll see a completely different story, and that Superflex will tend to alter then the pick amounts and positions of the other players. But I'm just using a typical 12-player redraft when are quarterbacks picked. Tight ends, for instance, tend to go just a tad early. There have been in the 7 years 2 quarterbacks picked 7th through 12th. So it is a rarity to see quarterbacks picked before the, in round 1, late round 1. So most likely you're getting more picking a little bit earlier than quarterbacks, and you can start seeing these numbers. And we see starting by the time the quarterbacks are picking up tight ends, and we're starting to see about right in here, you get 9 and 7, then there's a break. So what's happening are people are probably picking tight ends a little bit earlier, and then probably starting to pick up their second or third tight ends much late in the draft here. So you should anticipate waves of tight end picking, maybe get that top 2 or 3 tight ends, and then maybe a second, and then probably a third here, whereas we're tending to pick a first quarterback here, maybe a second here kind of thing. So you just get a sense of patterns here. Running backs are completely different than the quarterbacks and the tight ends. You can take a look, and in the last 7 years, 28 running backs have been grabbed in the first 6 picks on average. So that is a high amount, and we have seen that trend of everybody's jumping on running backs early, and wide receivers tend to be 14 and 14 in the first 12 picks, and running backs tend to be, 54. So we're talking almost half the wide receivers are being picked versus the running backs. So most likely in your redrafts this year in 2022, that trend is probably not going to change. And if you look, and that's why I like to set up my ratio here, we're talking 2-to-1, almost 2-to-1 in the first round of running backs to wide receivers, okay? And then that starts falling down. So what's happening by this ratio, if you want to look at it that way, people are grabbing an RB and then starting to pick up a wide receiver, maybe even 2 wide receivers, and then swinging back around and tending to get another running back. So the pattern is kind of an early running back, couple wide receivers, and coming back to your wide running back 2. So that's kind of a typical pattern that we see. In other words, if you were to pick, say, 2 wide receivers or 3 and then some running backs, that's going to be very atypical. If you were going to pick a tight end and a quarterback early, that would be atypical. Notice I hadn't said that's the right or wrong thing to do. I'm just saying this information is just for us to consider what we're going to be seeing. In other words, you don't want to not consider and figure that out. So, for instance, if you're in a draft and everybody, for whatever reason, is picking wide receivers, that probably is leaving running backs out that probably are going to be what we call value. Okay, and of course it's a little bit harder to get. That's a term that everybody thinks they understand what is value, but what is value? And people try to equate it to kind of like what they call draft capital, i.e. money, right? And if you think of things like that, right, you're buying something cheaper than its real value, right? You go into a garage sale and find a set of golf clubs for $5, and you know good and well that you can't buy a new set of golf clubs for $5. So that is a value in that sense. So there's this value concept here that's out there. So again, I think the ratios is allowing you to catch what's high and what's low. So I stained in purple. Purple is highly biased to the RBs, and you can see when those are popping up. And the yellow is biased to the wide receivers here. So early on, most of your league is going to be drafting a combination of running backs and wide receivers. Probably RBWR the first couple rounds. That's going to be the typical. Atypical would be some other pattern. Again, doesn't mean that's the way you should go. It's just this is what you should expect. So then when you're getting deep into your player rankings, one might consider how does that jive in with this pattern? In other words, is there opportunities for you to pick players that are undervalued versus overvalued, right? That are worth less than you would pay for them, that kind of thing. And we have the QB to tight end. And again, strong bias to the quarterback would be in purple, and the strong bias to the tight end would be in yellow. So again, what we're seeing with that is a lot more tight ends going before quarterbacks on average, and then people start picking quarterbacks certainly by the 60th pick, even is the 48th pick. People are grabbing a couple wide receivers, maybe a couple running backs, and then they're fifth and sixth, they're thinking, hey, I need a tight end, I need a quarterback kind of thing. Realize that if you pick quarterbacks, tight ends early, then, are you leaving key running backs, your third or fourth running back, wide receiver out there for others? So there's that balance in planning your draft. You just can't, people say, well, I'll just go in there and pick value. I believe you do have to have a plan. You cannot just not have some idea of what the expectation is for your draft and how do you respond to that. In other words, kind of go in with some ideas because you never quite know how it's going to play. So, in this, you can freeze and copy and screenshot this if you want to see this data. And I'll post it, the lesson, up on my professor's classroom in Fake Pigskin. We'll have lots of fun there. And we'll set up these new lessons for 2022 here. And this is usually what I start with first, is the ADP versus end of season kind of thing. Right now we're just looking at pick patterns, just kind of what is expected here. So if we were to graph this ratio, to me ratios give a little better insight. It actually looks at the two positions, and you clearly, early in the draft, it's the RBWR questions, who to pick, when to pick, how many to pick, versus the tight end quarterback predictions, where do you pick them and whatnot. So what I've done is have up to 26 sectors, and I've plotted the ratio that we calculated in the first slide and just plotted it, and the yellow is the RB to WR, and the red is QB to TE. And I've marked in purple, the purple dashed line, 1. That means if the ratio is close to 1, that means the two positions are equally picked. The further away from 1, the more biased to that position. So we see the story in the first round, that's 1 in the second 6, so that's 1 first to 12th pick here. It's dominated by the running back. So the tendency is people are grabbing RBs, and I don't think that's going to change much here. So do you want to do that or not? Some people also have well, if I get the first X picks, say the first 4 picks, then I will grab one of the RBs. But at a certain position, say the 6th, then maybe I should grab a wide receiver. In other words, you've got to make that call And sometimes the draft will tell you where to go because some people will deviate from expectation and you just need to be there. In other words, the concept is a key running back falls down the board concept versus a wide receiver. And so you need to plan that. So if you just follow this across the draft, you can see the swings and the patterns. And notice there tends to be a shift, kind of in some ways an extreme, for going to the RB, then grabbing wide receivers. I better get some more RBs, better grab some more wide receivers. And it looks to me like it's a reactive tendency. In other words, people are grabbing one or two RBs, and then notice in this range here from what the 13th through whatever the 7th is, 42nd, people are grabbing one or two wide receivers. So people are responding. The RB is leading people to kind of pick WRWR, which is fine, and maybe that's the play. But if you're picking because you're trying to balance your team or whatever, and I've always thought there's a bias in fantasy football to where people are scared to get too unbalanced. In other words, you won't see a lot of people grabbing 4 running backs in a row or 4 wide receivers in a row. That's going to elevate your risk, okay? And that's going to change your mental acuity there. You're going to get worried. You're nervous. Should I be doing that? Is the ice cracking? What have I done here? There's this panic. I better just... And then that, if you're letting that lead you, then potentially you're grabbing picks that are not in your best interest, i.e. that are overvalued or whatever. So you need to consider how you approach this, but don't let, the runs and the patterns drive you. In other words, people say, well, I'd rather start a run than draft into a run. And there may be some common sense to that. In other words, if you're picking because everybody else is picking, running backs, then you're not playing your game, are you? You're kind of reacting to everybody. So you need, and that's going to be the hardest thing I think I've seen people do is, maybe they'll grab an RB, then, okay, the third pick. There's that tendency to grab that wide receiver. But if you look at the board, is a great RB still there? In other words, how do you approach that? Are you going to walk away from a great value to get an okay value wide receiver? You're going to have to decide how you play that or not. So that's what I see is kind of a reactive situation. And you see by the 9th sector here, look, people are, I better grab another RB or my third one. So maybe by the 6th pick, you've got 3 RBs and 3 wide receivers. That feels balanced, doesn't it? Feels safe. I don't know if that's the best way. Sometimes I've drafted and that's just the way it's done, but I'm trying to fight that tendency. In other words, I don't want to draft to feel safe. I want to draft to make the best choice, and that is going to be a hard thing, especially if you're kind of new to this. And the pundits, the experts, sometimes they'll get ahead of themselves and they'll sit there and parse out, oh, this is the 31st wide receiver and this is the 35th, so I better pick the one over the other. To me, I like to look top down first. So that's why I start at this level at the top and then go into the draft deeper still. Some people do bottom up. Right now, people are making calls about players, and we don't even know where some of these players are going to be, what these teams are going to be, who the coaches are. People are jumping the gun. And then once there's a foundational piece of information, then people jump onto that and you say, well, it's a halo effect. Like, well, boy, everybody's talking about player X in February. He must be good. I better remember that in June. Who knows what's going on in June? You cannot, uh, uh, you know, be hung up by all the pundits. And, by the way, what is an expert? Uh, Nobody gets an advanced degree in fantasy football. There are data scientists out there. That's fine. They have earned their PhD, right? There are people that have got high degrees in math, probability, stats. Those are the ones that are going to pique my interest versus, the guy's an expert at the bar exam, right? But not at a lawyer down the street at the blue node or the lymph node or whatever the dive is, and they're an expert now. And just because you've been doing something for a long period doesn't mean you're doing it right. You can be doing the same wrong stuff all your life. Okay. So be aware of that. I have spent my life using the scientific method and trying to let that be a guide. And no offense to anybody out there, but I've been in school since 1977 in biology, which is numerically, there's a lot of math and decisions and scientific method. And I've been doing that since 1977. Okay. And now I've just, turned it in the last 10 years to fantasy football, and I've gotten better. And that's what happens is you change, you approve things, and see what's happening, have questions, look at the data, analyze it, figure out what you found. Is there another question to go for? So right now, the question that I am curious about is ADP versus end of season. So that's what started me out in this journey that we've talked about for, oh my God, 28 minutes of me rambling on here. Hey, that's just me. So again, with RB and WRs, I feel like by the sixth pick, a lot of people have grabbed two, and a tight end or a quarterback, or 3 and 3, or something near that. So everybody's kind of going through the first 6, 7, 8, trying to be balanced. And then somehow they start reaching for the stars and grabbing those sleepers, which I'm not even sure what sleeper's another term like value. What's that mean? Does anybody statistically really, what's a sleeper? Is it twice the value that it should be? 3 times the value? 10 times the value? What does that really mean? So it gets murky quick here. And by the way, if you hadn't figured it out, if you've never heard of me before, I take this serious, and I'm treating you like it's serious. If you're the kind that's, hey, you want to drink a 6-pack and then go to your draft, you probably already turned me off, right? This is for serious people who are trying to improve themselves. And by the way, a lot of these concepts can be useful in other endeavors in our life as well. So I just wanted to let you know, I think you get some so-called spin-off uh, events in decision making and risk analysis and stress analysis and biases, a lot of things that I do research on. Okay. So that is what I've seen. That's why you see different levels of spikes to where here's two RBs followed by two WRs, an equal and then a WR, then back, WR, then RB, then back. See, it just looks like it's kind of like one that I better go grab another. And that's probably not the value of the players. It's just a pattern they get into. Oh, I'm tired. Uh, Another thing is people like to do, fast drafts. I do slow drafts. I like 6 hours, 8 hours or more between picks. And I do not complain that if you take your 8 hours or 6 hours, okay? It gives me time to marinate. One of my lessons talks about the concepts in Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. I recommend that book by Nobel Prize winning uh, behavioral economics individual, Daniel Kahneman, and I would urge you to read his book and also a book called Noise, in Flaws in Human Judgment. So that's what I'm doing for my spare time, is thinking about, chaotic decisions under chaos and uncertainty. Okay, that's the toughest thing we'll do. Making a pick in the middle of a hurricane, right? Got all this stuff swirling around us, and it gets tough sometimes. So anyway, that's what I see with the RBs and the WRs. And the QB and the tight end, I see a tendency of grabbing the tight end a little earlier and then switching to the QBs. Take a look in this sector, about the 8th sector to almost the 12th sector, it's ruled by QBs. And tight ends are ruling at about the 2nd to the 7th sector. A little bit of peak right here. There's some people stepping in on the QBs right here. But for the most part, it's tight end followed by quarterbacks here. And then maybe a second quarterback. And then, at that point, people have gotten a tight end or two. Some people only draft one tight end. So that's why this is a little bit chaotic in its pattern here. So study this pattern. Think about what it's telling you and what it could tell you about drafts and how it all goes about here. So I'm going to shut this down, and this will be my first lesson, 33 minutes, trying to get a little shorter this year. And anyway, this is Dr. John Bush for The Process, and we will continue in this block of material trying to answer the question, ADP versus end of season. What is the connection? Is there a predictive power in ADPs to end of season? And if so, how much is it? So it's kind of some sub questions there. So come back for the next lesson here. We're having lots of fun, huh? Welcome back. Welcome for 2022. Woo, woo.